Bioshock forever! Woo! I hear this game was named after how long it takes to explain, so allow me not to do any of that and instead try to just describe it with a shit ton of snarky remarks thrown in because I feel kind of threatened by the complexity and depth of the plot. Also, everyone else has already got round to explaining it, so why should I? My life is just easier if I use the normal style of these things. With that being said, actually, I should really mention that I never played the original Bioshock or Bioshock 2, so any references or tie-ins to those games will be completely lost on me. Man, this is sounding like a professional and well thought out video. Anyway, where was I? The game begins with the main protagonist, one Mr. Booker DeWitt, being taken to a very remote island that contains nothing but a lighthouse and some very out-of-place barrels. Well, technically it starts with a quote from Robert Lutece, a character in the game, about the mind making memories where none exist, but that only becomes relevant after several hours of the game have passed by and won't tie into anything for a long time. Incidentally, the two people taking Booker to the island are Robert and Rosalind Lutece, a brother and sister duo who keep showing up wherever Booker goes. They have fairly large roles in the plot, but just remember their names for now. Booker is carrying a box that contains a pistol with a picture of a girl called Elizabeth with the caption, "Bring to New York unharmed," as well as a few other bits and pieces. Unsurprisingly, this will be his mission for the majority of the game. Things waste no time getting foreboding for Booker, as there is a note on the door of the lighthouse telling him to bring us the girl and wipe away the debt, a very much murdered dead body just lying around, and an extremely out-of-place temporary font, complete with a message about religious salvation. This doesn't faze Booker, who climbs to the top of the lighthouse and is launched into the sky via some sort of flying pod thing. This pod takes Booker to the beautiful flying city of Columbia, where he is deposited in a church and promptly baptized into unconsciousness. He also sees this quote, which is another one of those will be important later things, so go ahead and take that in. While you're doing that, I'd like to state the obvious and say that Columbia is quite religious. After Booker wakes up from his baptismal flashback of an old apartment, he is free to wander around Columbia, where it is subtly revealed through the dialogue civilians that Columbians are both obsessed with their leader, a man by the name of Father Zachary Comstock, who is a prophet, and pleasantly racist. Columbians also have access to potions called vigors that can give you special powers, and Booker gets to try some of these out at a fair that just happens to be going on in a rather tutorial-y way. Booker also receives a letter from Lutece, no clue which one, shut up if you know, it isn't important, that informs him not to pick number 77 in the fair's raffle. Naturally, he does exactly that and wins the chance to throw the first baseball in what is essentially the public stoning of an interracial couple. See, I told you they were pleasantly racist. All hell breaks loose when some guards at the fair notice that Booker has the same AD marking on his hand that Comstock said a false shepherd will have, so Booker is forced to unfortunately murder everyone with this really brutal spinning claw gameplay mechanic contraption. I realize that I should probably mention that Booker has the option to either throw the baseball at the couple or at the guy running the event. I could show you the outcome of both of these choices, but I'm not going to because no one who isn't a complete cunt would pick the racist option. Also, the only difference is what option you pick. The dialogue even stays the same, so this choice is basically just there to be a choice, but hey, I did the token insulting racists part of this video. After this sequence of murders, Booker continues on towards Monument Island, the place where Elizabeth is being imprisoned. The Luteces show up to give him a shield, and then there's a lot more fighting and world building. For the record, I decided not to include many of the world building techniques employed in this game in this video because most of them have surprisingly little relevance to the main plot. That's why I'm currently showing you Columbia's gayest quartet in all their glory. Comstock shows up in giant blimp form to talk prophetic nonsense at Booker, and Booker responds by hijacking the blimp for about 10 seconds before one of Comstock's followers sets it on fire. Booker escapes and finally reaches Monument Island, where it is shown that Elizabeth is not only very closely monitored, but machines have been created that can alter objects that have a connection with her. Then Elizabeth becomes an even more confusing character, as it is revealed that Comstock believes that she will, as his daughter, bring about the end of all human life that is not on Columbia, and Elizabeth is capable of opening up tears between different timelines. Booker is worryingly calm when faced with this bizarre information, and proceeds to break into Elizabeth's living quarters and tell her that he can set her free. Before things stop being hectic for too long, however, Elizabeth's protector, a giant robot bird called Songbird, turns up and our pair of heroes have to escape the tower. They achieve this and watch Monument Island fall to pieces before being hurled into deep water, which is Songbird's weakness apparently. Booker goes back into his apartment dream, and this time Elizabeth is there, saying bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. Also, Booker was repeating the name Anna while unconscious, which is another one of those remember this for later things. Elizabeth then revives Booker, and it turns out that they are both on an artificial Colombian beach. Time to look at some sexy Victorian era swimsuits, baby. Also, something about Booker taking Elizabeth to Paris on an airship, but trust me, the swimsuits are irresistible. Oh yeah, and then the Luteces show up and you have to decide which brooch you want Elizabeth to wear. Remember how much I complained about the meaningless choices in Far Cry 4? Well, there isn't going to be any of that here, because the choices in this game are too inconsequential to complain about. On the way to the airship, Elizabeth reveals that she can pick locks, which even she says shouldn't come as a surprise for anyone, given the fact that she was locked at a tower for most of her life, and is almost captured in an ambush, but gets away safely. Although she is rather taken aback by Booker's ability to end lives. Our heroes find a gondola to the airship, but it can only be powered by a vigor called Shock Jockey that Booker hasn't obtained yet. Shock Jockey can be found at the Hall of Heroes, which is where Booker and Elizabeth head to next, but unfortunately they run into a living subplot called Captain Cornelius Slate. Slate is pissed off that Comstock took credit for all of his military victories and continually calls Comstock's men tin soldiers, as opposed to the real soldiers he believes his men and Booker to be. To be fair, Comstock does genuinely use metal men, but I personally think they look a lot more like steel soldiers. Anyway, Slate says that he will give Booker Shock Jockey once he kills all of his men and Slate himself, giving them all what Slate believes to be honourable deaths. This is exactly what happens, and our heroes move on. This whole section is basically just to show that Booker was in the army once. There is also the third choice of the game, where you can kill Slate or leave him to Comstock's men, but he looks so pitiful and wants Booker to kill him so much that I don't understand why you wouldn't want Booker to pull the trigger, although this might be one of those morality things I never understand. Once aboard the gondola, Elizabeth and Booker have enough downtime for Booker to explain that he only freed Elizabeth in order to take her to a man who will clear him of his gambling debts if he does this. Now it's Elizabeth's turn to be accepting of strange information, until they're at the controls of the airship, and she finally realizes that Booker is taking her to New York, not Paris, even though he literally just told her this. Then she knocks him out. Without Booker awake to defend it, Elizabeth abandons the airship as it is taken over by members of a movement known as the Vox Populi, who want to overthrow Comstock and his stupidly racist ways. The leader of the Vox, a woman with no concept of personal space called Daisy Fitzroy, tells Booker that he can have control of the airship again after he supplies the Vox with weapons for their uprising. The Vox drop Booker off back in Columbia, and Booker wastes no time in finding Elizabeth, who failed to stow away on a different ship. Once Booker and Elizabeth save each other, Elizabeth realizes that Booker is her only way to reach Paris, and they team up again after about 10 minutes of separation. On the way to the gunsmith, Elizabeth finds out that she was not the child of Comstock's wife, and then another character brings himself into the mix. Jeremiah Fink had up to this point been established as an extremely racist businessman who owns a large town in Columbia called Finkton, and many workers. I understand that this sentence comes off as weird, but he does essentially own the workers. The gunsmith, who is called Chen Lin, I probably should have said that earlier, but I really cannot be bothered to find out when it's revealed in the game, lives in Finkton, so it seems that Booker will have to get through Fink to get to him. At Chen Lin's house, his Buddhist wife tells you that he has been taken to a club by Fink's men. This turns out to be a ploy by Fink to try to offer Booker a position as head of his security, but Booker refuses, and Elizabeth and Booker continue on into Fink's prison, where they find a dead Chen Lin. This would seem to be a colossal problem, but the Luteces show up to explain to Elizabeth that she and Booker could travel through one of her tears to a world where Chen Lin was never dead. They do this, but upon returning to Chen Lin's workshop, they find out that he has gone insane due to the fact that part of him remembers being dead, and his tools have been impounded. His new Christian wife, who is the reason he didn't die in this world, says that retrieving his tools might fix him, so Booker and Elizabeth head off to find them. On the way, they have a really dumb conversation about Elizabeth's weird hand deformity, which is basically just saying, this thing is important, you don't know why yet, but it is, promise. When Elizabeth and Booker find the tools, they realize that they have no way to transport them, but a tiny little gigantic oversight like this won't stop our heroes, as jumping between worlds is quickly becoming one of their favourite pastimes, and Elizabeth opens a tear to a world where the tools were never impounded. Unfortunately, in this world, the Vox are midway through taking over all of Columbia, thanks to the help of the Booker DeWitt who was previously in this world and died for their cause, and whose memories Booker can now see. Completely out of left field, musical number and child feeding sequence now happens. What? Seeing the uprising, Booker and Elizabeth both realize that Fitzroy is just as bad as Comstock, despite originally fighting for a good cause. But Fitzroy is the only person who can give them an airship, so they continue to fight for the Vox. That is until Fitzroy chimes in herself and says that a new Booker DeWitt entering her world after the last one died a martyr isn't good for her, so she intends to kill him. Fitzroy then murders Fink and does this, and is about to kill a child that I presume is related to Fink, when Booker distracts her, giving Elizabeth enough time to stab her with a giant fucking pair of scissors right through her chest. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this moment dwarfs any violent act Booker has committed thus far. I mean, those are fucking scissors and they come through her chest, like, from behind all the way through. So after Elizabeth gives herself PTSD, our heroes finally reach the airship. Elizabeth gives herself a makeover using Lady Comstock's clothes, and they're about to leave Columbia when Songbird swoops in because literally nothing positive can ever happen to these two people for more than a minute. The airship crashes, then the Luteces show up to inform Elizabeth that she can control Songbird with the right instrument and notes. They then give Booker a picture of the instrument needed, but no indication of what notes are required to accompany it. The instrument in question can be found at Comstock House, so that is where our heroes head to, and on the way there it is shown just how cruel the Vox can be. Elizabeth also realizes who the Lutesses are at this point in the game, but I've been acting like you know this for the whole video because calling them something like the strange couple would have felt just kind of cringy. Songbird finally catches up with Elizabeth and Booker when one of Comstock's statues summons him, but they manage to evade detection. At this point Elizabeth realizes that she might be forced to return to the tower and asks Booker to kill her if there is no other way to stop that from happening. At the entrance to Comstock House, the door mechanism thinks that Elizabeth is Lady Comstock due to the fact that she is wearing her clothes, but doesn't let her in because she has the wrong fingerprints. It just so happens, however, that the crypt that contains the preserved body of Lady Comstock is conveniently just around the corner. So our heroes merrily set off to cut off the hand of Elizabeth's long-deceased not-quite mother. These are clearly two people who will have absolutely no trouble sleeping when this is all over. This plan backfires spectacularly, and Comstock uses Elizabeth's power to bring a ghost of Lady Comstock into existence, as any good husband would do in the circumstances. This whole section is basically a way to explain some background on various characters. It turns out that Comstock was made sterile by the Lutesses' reality hopping machine, so Elizabeth could not possibly be the biological daughter of Comstock, which would suggest that she couldn't fulfill his prophecy involving the seed of the prophet. Lady Comstock thought that Rosalind Lutece was the mother of Elizabeth, but Lutece explains that Elizabeth was a product of the previously mentioned machine. And finally, Comstock had the Lutesses killed to wrap everything up as neatly as possible, until they started appearing all over the place and talking about syntax. Elizabeth also realizes that the ghost of Lady Comstock is not just the original spirit, but is tainted by her perception of what she was like. After this, Booker can finally stop fighting the damn thing, as Elizabeth tells the ghost that she is sorry and that they need to fight Comstock, and this is enough to make the apparition disperse. You know, that was an actual positive event, so obviously Songbird turns up, throws Booker through a building, putting him back into his dream, which is different now because the Lutesses are there, and then takes Elizabeth back to her tower. Also, Booker is transported into the future for fuck knows what reason, and everything gets very spooky, as it is revealed that Elizabeth was gradually broken down to the point where she led the Columbians in an assault on humanity. Actually, I have a genuine complaint about the plot here, since it is revealed that old future Elizabeth is the one who brought Booker to this point in time because she wanted to send him back to save her before she got broken down, but surely this transportation of Booker is what prevented her from being saved by him in the first place, so there should never have been a need for things to get this convoluted. Anyway, future Elizabeth gives Booker a card to deliver to present Elizabeth, then sends Booker back in time, where he saves Elizabeth from a machine that will stop her powers from working. Elizabeth is now hell-bent on killing Comstock to stop this madness, so she and Booker head off to find him. Comstock puts quite a few people between himself and our heroes, but they are no match for Booker, and they finally catch up with him. Comstock tries to force Booker to explain Elizabeth's finger deformity, but he snaps and murders Comstock in a manner that is almost as violent as Fitzroy's death, but doesn't get as many style points. The Vox then try to destroy the airship that Comstock was in and Booker is now trying to defend, but Elizabeth realizes that the notes she needs to control Songbird are C, A, G, and E, as represented by a picture of a cage on the card that future Elizabeth gave Booker. With Songbird's help, Booker defeats the Vox and then destroys Monument Island, which apparently contained a device that was inhibiting Elizabeth's power. Elizabeth uses her newfound strength to transport Booker, herself, and Songbird to Rapture, where Songbird drowns. I am dead serious when I say that this is the saddest moment in the game. This creature did not deserve death. But Elizabeth apologizes and then it dies. Elizabeth and Booker then travel to the surface of the ocean, and Elizabeth says that they can now travel freely between worlds through lighthouses that act as doorways between them. The pair of them travel to one of Booker's memories where he refused to be baptized, but Elizabeth tells Booker that Comstock was also there. They then travel to the apartment from Booker's dream, where Booker sees the real memory he should be having, where Robert Lutece is asking him to hand over his daughter, Anna, in exchange for removing his debt. After this, they travel to the past to see the Lutesses and Comstock taking Anna through a portal into their world. Booker only now remembers that Anna is his daughter, and this scene is where everything falls into place, as a piece of Anna's finger is sliced off when the portal closes, so I might as well do a bit of explaining. Anna and Elizabeth are the same person, as are Comstock and Booker. The difference in that being that Booker and Comstock come from different timelines where one accepted the baptism and the other did not, whereas Anna is Elizabeth entirely. Comstock believed that he had to have a child of his own to fulfill his seed of the prophet prophecy, but the Lutesses' machine had made him infertile, so he got Rosalind Lutece to contact a version of herself from the world that Booker is from, this being Robert Lutece, and try to find the alternate version of himself that had a child, since they would technically still be the seed of the prophet. Since Booker was in so much debt, debt, he sold his own daughter to Robert Lutece, but tried to stop the deal at the very last second, forcing Robert Lutece to remain in a world that was not his own. Also, the fact that part of Elizabeth's finger was still in her original world was the source of her powers. Everything would have been fine, except Comstock had the Luteces murdered, so they decided to find Booker and send him through a doorway into Comstock's timeline to find all of this out and then stop it from ever happening. Booker and Elizabeth finally travel to the baptism again, the birthplace of Comstock from Booker, and instead of accepting or declining the baptism, Elizabeth drowns Booker, effectively removing both of them from existence. If anyone managed to understand that last paragraph, I would honestly be amazed, but hey, that's what actually happens in the game. I just abridged it. So yeah, Bioshock Infinite deserved to be called clever because the plot is genuinely very complex, but not to the point where it feels desperate or convoluted. Also, I am aware of the fact that I skipped a lot of things, but this is just my way of telling the story, and I didn't want to make this video any longer. In fact, the script is already over 3,500 words long, so I should really stop at this point. I guess all there is to say now is see you next time I do something, and feel free to mention your personal favourite thing that I missed in the comments. I promise to read them and then ignore them after a brief period of thought. Jesus Christ, I should shut my mouth now, but this outro is becoming infinite. Bioshock Infinite. Bam!